Just to give you a bit of context on the objective of this session. So this training session objectives is to equip public authorities with practical knowledge and tools to develop integrated approaches to build climate resilient societies. And our aim is to better understand the connections between local planning for the clean energy transition and for climate adaptation. As energy is a key sector in both mitigation and adaptation, we will use it as a starting point to reflect on synergies and integration of both adaptation and clean energy planning. So to reach this objective, we decided to merge the forces of Plan for Set project, so a project aiming at supporting regions and cities to fulfill their clean energy transition, and the Resilience project, a project supporting regions to progress in their climate resilience pathway. So like that, we have the two aspects, the clean energy planning and the pathway towards resilience for regions and local authorities. So to give you again a bit more context, I will now give the floor to Irene Biancani, my colleague. Just here, she will present herself and the Plan for Set project, so you have all the context.
Welcome, everyone.
I think you're muted.
I can't hear her.
Closer to the microphone. Okay, so I was saying thank you everyone for being here today, and welcome again to this webinar. So my name is Irene. I work as project officer at Federen with my colleague Nadesh. And today we have organized this webinar together with the Resilience project and the Plan for Set project. As you may have seen somewhere in our social media, on Federen social media, on Federen website, this webinar marks the third online event of the Plan for Set Transition Expert Series. So before starting with the interesting presentations of our guests, I would like to spend just 2 words on the Plan for Set project. So what is Plan for Set? Plan for Set is a live 2022 CET project and which aim to support the European regions and cities in the design, development and implementation of clean energy transition plans that needs to be tailored to their needs and possibilities. How does the Plan for Set project intend to achieve this goal? So first of all, we want to support the institutionalization of set governance, mobilizing local actors, creating opportunities for participation, co-creation, and engagement with multiple actors. We want to execute integrated and intersectoral CET planning, and then we aim to achieve the Plan for Set overall goal by developing capacities and provide specialized support to municipalities and their regions. So I have highlighted this last point because this is going to be the goal of the Transition Expert Program. In the Plan for Set project, whose partners and consortium you can see in the slide above, we have 3 pilot regions that are going to test the Plan for Set methodology. Okay, I see that you
No, we
can't
can.
hear me.
We can.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. So I was saying that in the Plan for Set project, we have 3 pilot regions. We have Navarra in Spain, Scone in Sweden, and Parma in Italy. So what is the Transition Expert? So the Transition Expert is part of a set of 3 learning opportunities for regional and local authorities of the Plan for Set project. So the Transition Expert is divided in 10 webinars, 5 local webinars that are going to be done in the languages of the pilot regions, and will focus on local issues and topics, and then 5 common ground webinars, which this one is part of the 5 common ground webinars. And we will have 2 others in the near future, in February, one on district heating plants and another one on the role of energy agencies. So be sure you don't miss this. You will see them advertised in our social media and website. Then we have another training opportunity within the Plan for SET, which is the Transition Manager, which is a program that foresees a bigger engagement from local authorities, because there are some on-site and online trainings, and you can see that this program has been developed and is in progress in the pilot regions, and we have here some pictures from Italy and Sweden. And then we have another program, which is the Zero Carbon Community Manager, which still has to start. So what is the objective of these Plan for SET training opportunities? Is to provide the local authorities with new competencies through the capacity building of their policymaker and municipal staff. So overall, the Plan for SET wants to develop trainings to help local and regional authorities to, first of all, manage and understand the clean energy transition, then to activate local communities, and to make use of the platforms and data centers. So this is all from my side. I'll just leave the floor back to Nadesh to present no, actually, I forgot about this. This is the just a few words, and then I'll stop speaking. This is the website, the Plan for SET website, that you can look at the planforset.eu. And the website is going to act as a repository of all the Plan for SET materials, methodology, and tools that are developed during the project life. At the moment, you can find also the Transition Manager guidebooks that we have developed in the languages of the Plan for SET project. And you can find the training book for public administration and the workshop guide for communities and quintuple helix. So you can download this for free, and you can check these scanning the QR code, and they will be available soon in the Plan for SET website. So now, Nadesh, I'll give floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Irene. So now you know more about Plan for SET project, and I will quickly speak about Resilience project. So then after we can dive into the topics of today. So Resilience is a project which aims at supporting European regions to progress in their climate resilience pathway. We focus more particularly on 7 regions. So we have Murcia, Valencia, Madeira, La Réunion, Istria, Plovdiv region in Bulgaria, and Central Macedonia. We developed different material and tools, including one on maladaptation that will be introduced later today. Everything is available on our website, and if you have questions, do not hesitate to contact us through our help desk at info@regilience.eu and subscribe to our newsletter. You can see everything on our website. But here I will focus on our capacity building program. We offer open training sessions available to all interested participants. The program was divided into 2 cycles. The first one aimed to set the scene of pathway development towards climate resilience and raise awareness on the EU landscape and initiatives, EU funding and financing opportunities, and the EU governance on adaptation and resilience. This cycle ended in March this year, and we are now entering our second cycle, aiming at providing more concrete know-how and inspiration on specific sectors. During these sessions, we will underline sectoral challenges and showcase best practices and solutions from on-the-ground experiences. Today's topic is the energy sector, as you already understood. And the next ones entail health, just resilience, water, citizen engagement, and nature-based solutions, among others. If you missed the sessions of our first cycle, do not worry. We have the recordings available on our YouTube channel. So as you can see, we have We had one session on the EU landscape. The second one was on the pathway development. We presented one of our deliverable on pathway development. Then we had the session on financial support, on funding and financing opportunities at the EU level. And the last one on multi-level governance in adaptation and resilience topics. Now for the presentation of the agenda, I will give the floor back to Irene.
Yes, I hope you can hear me now. So I'll just try and raise my voice. So after an introduction by Ine van del Castele from the European Environment Agency on climate action in the energy sector, we will explore how urban planning can integrate both clean energy and adaptation with Tomislav Novosel from REGIA. He will present the implant project findings and its tools. We will then hear about concrete examples of measures addressing both energy and climate aspects. Firstly, with a presentation by Milenko Sedlar from REGIA on climate proofing of public infrastructure and services, and then by a second intervention from Eleonora Leonardi from Impetus on agrothermal performance of historic buildings. So finally, we will conclude with a description of some monitoring and evaluation specificities for adaptation measures with a presentation by Christian Kind from Adelphi.
And if I may add a little thing, is that at the end of the session, we have a satisfaction survey. It's very short. It's less than 2 minutes to answer. And we would really appreciate if you can stay until the end and complete the survey. It helps us improve the sessions each time. So please complete it. Now we have our small survey aimed at knowing a bit more about you, about our audience. So here you can either scan the QR code that you can see currently on the screen, or join at slido.com. So you type slido.com, you go to this website, and then they will ask you to put a code, and the code is the one just here, 17, 58, 45, and 7. So the first question is, from which country do you join us today? I see that there's already a few participants responding. So that's good news, means that it works. Okay, so we have participants from Spain, Spain is getting bigger, but we also have Germany, Croatia, Italy, Ireland, two people from Ireland, Portugal, Italy again, Italy getting bigger, Germany, Slovenia, France, again, Berlin, Germany again. Okay, so I can see that the most mentioned countries are Italy and Spain. You also have Germany and Croatia and Portugal that are quite well represented. We can go to the next question. For which type of organization do you work? So we can see that the most represented kind of organization is the NGO or non-profit organizations. That's interesting. We also have academia or research organizations. And third, the local and regional authorities are getting bigger. there's a competition between academia or research organization. Okay. NGO and non-profit organizations are the most represented. Okay. Then next question, which sector do you know best? Climate adaptation, resilience, or clean energy? I can see that a lot of people know best adaptation and resilience. Maybe you registered through the communication made by the Resilience Project, but we have quite well represented the clean energy sector, so that's good. And last question, to what extent do you think the two sectors are currently working together? So we can see that it's not really the best. It's 3 out of 5. So still collaboration, but not perfect. I hope that maybe after this webinar you will have more ideas on how to link or to have common activities, common collaborations between the two sectors. So without further ado, I will give back the floor to Irene to introduce our first speaker today.
Yes, so our first speaker is Ine van den Kastele from the European Environment Agency, and she leads the work on subnational adaptation to climate change in the Climate Risk and Resilience Unit of her agency. Most recently, she coordinated the publication of the EEA Zurbark Adaptation Report of 2024 and contributed towards the first European climate risk assessment. So, Ine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. I will just share my presentation. Okay. So good morning to you all. So I am Ina. I'm indeed working at the European Environment Agency, and I've been asked to give you an introduction to the topic. So I'll be setting the scene on climate risk and resilience, and then specifically, what does that mean for the energy sector? So there we go. The European Environment Agency, for those who don't know, is an agency of the European Union. So its role is to gather information across all of its member and cooperating countries and translates that reported information into policy and decision-making material that can actually help to support Europe's policies. And it is about 300 of us based in Copenhagen, but we work with more than 1,000 experts from institutes all across Europe. So just a brief overview of some of the things we've been working on. The slides will be shared, and I've included all of the links to the material. So we work a lot on both mitigation and adaptation topics, and then also looking more and more into the sectors, including energy. So here I've just included what I will talk a bit more on today, which is the first European climate risk assessment, and a little bit more on urban adaptation and what cities are actually already doing. And then I've included a few more materials which go into more the mitigation side and emissions and specific issues to the energy sector. Additional resources which may be useful to you as well is Climate Adapt, which is our knowledge portal on adaptation. And that actually includes a few case studies as well on the energy sector and how you can adapt within the energy sector. I've also included here a link to our portal on climate and energy data. So that's actually the reported emissions from the countries in the different sectors, including energy and transport. And that's actually being redeveloped. So my colleagues have asked me to invite you to give feedback on that as well. So why is this so important? The first European climate risk assessment actually looked at what is currently happening in Europe. It recognizes that Europe is actually the fastest warming continent, and if no action at all is taken, we may reach up to 7 degrees warming by the end of the century compared to pre-industrial levels. That means that there will be major climate risks in across all sectors. 36 specific risks were identified, and 34 of them were seen as critical or reaching critical levels towards the end of the century. So from this, 5 sectors were seen as priority sectors, and within them it was a call for action or recognition that policy action is urgent in all of these different sectors, of which infrastructure and related energy supply is one. So why do we specifically need to adapt our cities? A lot of the implementation of actions is at the local or subnational level. And within our cities, we actually see that we have the urban heat island effects, which means that temperatures will be even warmer here. And we actually see that there's an increase in the number of people living within floodplains. We also see that about 75% of buildings are energy inefficient, and there are over 34 million people actually currently living in energy poverty conditions. So what are the risks that are identified specifically for energy? They're mostly linked to energy disruptions due to both heat and drought. The most severe ones are seen to be in Southern Europe, but there's also all over Europe possible disruption due to flooding as well, so heat and drought primarily, but also due to flooding. And these risks are all expected to increase towards the end of the century up to critical levels. In the bottom, I won't read through them, but I've also included some of the reported information from the countries actually identifying specific vulnerabilities related to the energy sector. So what are these risks? As temperatures increase, we see that there will be increase in cooling demand. There may be regional reductions in hydropower potential, reduced efficiency of thermal power plants, and electricity transmission will be more difficult. There may also be increased impact of extreme weather events on energy infrastructure. As I already mentioned, Southern Europe is expected to be the most impacted by these risks. And the report actually pushes for a stable and affordable energy supply. And this is central to our functioning because the risks experienced there can also cascade across into different sectors. So what can be done? Also looking at what is already being done at the city level, the actions that work best and that we need to prioritize are those that actually address at the same time both our mitigation goals, which are reducing atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations, and our adaptation goals, which is increasing societal resilience as a whole. So from this figure, you see that the actions that are central are those that have benefits for both of these goals. And those include things like circular economy, energy efficiency, energy and water savings, spatial planning, and green infrastructure. And all of these measures are especially important in the energy sector as well. So this is almost my last slide. What is actually being done at the local level? So this slide actually gives you an overview of all of the different adaptation measures that are already taken by cities. So the majority of those reported actions are still physical and technological. These are mostly early warning systems, which are seen as one of the most efficient ways to adapt population, but also still a lot of physical infrastructure. And as the scale of the risk expected in the future becomes increasingly known, we acknowledge that, of course, nature-based solutions should be prioritized where possible, but they may not be enough. So nature-based solutions are the second most reported type of adaptation action. And actually right now, half of larger European cities have adaptation plans, and 91% of those include some form of nature-based solution. So there is an increasing trend towards including nature-based solutions. But there are also other measures that are needed in combination. So there are an increasing number of governance measures. So this is planning, regulations, restriction of building in risk areas. Also, increasingly, cities acknowledge that the number one factor or enabling enabling factor for adaptation is actually citizen engagement. So knowledge and behavior actions, awareness raising, capacity building, while there are only 15% of actions right now, are growing. And a much smaller part of measures actually look at the economic and financing measures, so incentives for energy efficiency, for example, insurance. And this is a small proportion, but also growing. So in conclusion, cities are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and so is the energy sector. But at the local level, actually, cities are able to implement a lot of adaptation actions and can be key drivers of more transformative and longer-term change. Climate action in the energy sector needs to prioritize actions that cater to both mitigation and adaptation goals. And this includes the diversification of energy supply, the prioritization of renewables, improving energy efficiency, and demand-side management. And lastly, to mention here, I mentioned before energy poverty. Social justice is something that we are also increasingly looking at, and there will be a publication coming out next year on just resilience, because increasingly we need to also take into account social justice considerations in energy adaptation planning, ensuring that there is equitable access to resources and addressing energy poverty. Thank you. If there are any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ine. I think now we will give the floor to our next speaker, and I will leave.
Yes, I will present our next speaker. Thank you, Ine, first of all, for this insightful presentation. So our next speaker is Tomislav Novosel from REGEA, the Regional Energy Agency from Croatia. Tomislav has been working in the field of energy and climate planning for over a decade now, and he is currently coordinating the life-funded project InPlan, which aims to help cities and regions integrate elements of energy and climate into special plan. So Tomislav, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just one very small correction, because my boss, who is the head of climate, is also in this call. We are the Regional Energy and Climate Agency since 2 years ago, but the name is basically the same. So following on from this presentation, which I absolutely agree with its conclusions that cities are one of the main driving forces, and they do have some capacities to actually implement a wide variety of adaptation measures. They do have the capacity to implement a wide variety of adaptation measures. This isn't always happening at the pace that we would like it to happen. And here are 4 challenges that directly impact this. So the first thing that we've seen with our work with local and regional governments is that they very often lack the capacity and mechanisms to actually enact and enforce binding energy and climate policies, meaning that they do have the capacities to plan, but when it comes to the actual implementation of set plans, a lot of this capacity is lacking, and a lot of it is actually in the hands of the national level. The second one is that there is a strong lack of vertical and horizontal integration, or at least alignment of the various strategies, plans, and policies created at all levels. This means that basically we have different plans with different targets at the local, regional, and national level. These plans are rarely aligned. They will have differing ambitions, differing goals, and differing measures. And even worse, there's also a very strong lack of alignment across different sectors within a city or within a region, meaning that you will have different economic development, energy, and climate plans, which might have completely opposing policies within them. And there is also directly linked to this a lack of proper systemic, integrated, and consistent approach to energy and climate planning, meaning that they are very often viewed as basically just a silo, and again, they're not properly integrated into the overall governance within a local or regional government. And finally, there is a very clear lack of alignment between planning and the allocation of resources for the implementation of these plans, meaning that a lot of them are basically glorified wish lists, because without the proper allocation of resources, and I'm not talking just about direct funding, this also means about human resources and everything else, these plans cannot really be enforced. In short, there is a very big gap between planning and implementation at the local level. Whereas cities do have a lot of capacities, tools, and mechanisms to actually plan their actions. For instance, SecOps are a great example. There is a very clear lack of enforcement mechanisms. Now, SecOps are great documents. They provide a baseline, they provide a list of actions, and of course, the vision and the end goal, which will be the result of these measures. What a SecOp lacks is an enforcement chapter, and it also lacks the actual tools to be enforceable, especially because this is a voluntary document. On the other hand, cities do have some enforcement tools. One that we are using within the in-plan project is spatial planning. Spatial plans are both planning and enforcement mechanisms. If something is written down in a spatial plan, it cannot really be avoided. You cannot get a building permit for a building or for a piece of infrastructure if that piece of infrastructure or that building is not aligned with the relevant spatial plans. They should also, at least in theory, be aligned with each other through different levels. So be it regional, city, urban, or special spatial plans, they should all be aligned. And they should all also consider everything that we're talking about here. Spatial plans should consider green infrastructure, they should consider adaptation measures, and they should consider elements of energy, meaning climate change mitigation. Unfortunately, this often simply means that these plans determine the location of these types of infrastructure within the space that they are representing, meaning that they will define where green infrastructure is present, where power lines will be placed, where a certain piece of energy equipment will be placed. However, they rarely take into account the overall energy and climate vision of the city, of this region. And because of that, you get examples, as you can see on your right here. This is a spatial plan of one of the cities participating within InPlan. In green, you can see the distribution of the natural gas lines. In red, you can see the distribution of the district heating lines. The first issue that I have with this is that we often associate green with good, red with bad. And basically, the colors here indicate that natural gas is good and the district heating is bad, which is an immediate visual issue. But even more so than that, you can see a complete overlap between these two pieces of infrastructure, which basically directly interfere with each other. They are direct competition for the same users, and because of certain other mechanisms in place in Croatia, they also greatly disincentivize users from connecting to district heating and are basically locking people into natural gas. The same can also be viewed when looking at green infrastructure and climate change adaptation measures. Now, what can be done is that different energy and climate measures can be taken out from other strategic and planning documents. They can be translated into a more urbanistic language, basically giving them some explicit connections to locations within the map, and then they can be integrated into spatial plans. This process can look something like this. So basically, relevant plan strategies and measures, both for spatial planning and for the energy and climate side of things, as well as economic development, need to be identified. They need to be analyzed, and the measures from them need to be basically aggregated into a set of guidelines on how they can be integrated into the spatial plans. Of course, some of these things need to be additionally assessed, analyzed, and in some cases additional technical documentations and analysis need to be created. Basically, all of this is then prepared. The measures, as I said, need to be translated into an urbanistic language, and they can be integrated into a spatial plan. This all has to go through a set of public consultations, depending on the relevant national regulations, of course, and then finally this spatial plan can be formally adopted. Throughout this whole process, because in many cases this can be seen as an overreach of competences and authority by a city, because a lot of the measures suggested here will go beyond national standards. A continuous communication and cooperation both with the city, the developers of the spatial plan, but also the general public and the users of this place need to be held, so that basically everybody understands why this is happening, why this is a good thing, and why this is necessary. Some examples of assessments that we have done, and unfortunately most of these are focused on the mitigation and the energy side of things, basically include assessment of CO2 emissions, energy intensity, heating demand, and so on, spatially within the city limits, basically using GIS tools and some other tools as well. We have analyzed basically the entire area of the city that I mentioned, and we have assessed priority areas for the city's decarbonization. Then, using this information as well as other assessments, previous plans, and so on, we have split the city into zones, which basically represent the speed at which these zones need to be decarbonized. Mostly this will be impacted by the existing urban density. We have also highlighted some specific zones which are already green zones, for instance, that have no infrastructure, and suggested measures to further protect them. And of course, we have taken into account certain historical, cultural heritage issues, which of course limit and prevent some extensive work, and of course slow down the speed at which the transition can happen. There's a variety of actions that can be implemented through this process, both in the elements of mitigation, adaptation, mobility, and even potentially waste. Elements that can link to the climate change mitigation side of things, of course, include higher standards of energy efficiency of buildings within certain zones across the city for certain building types, all depending on the ambition and the political will within the city. There can be certain regulations on heating and cooling supply options, for instance, suggesting district heating zones or zero CO2 zones or zero combustion zones, for instance. There can be certain aspects dictating sustainable supply of electricity, for instance, mandating the use of building integrated photovoltaics. And there can, of course, be additional elements related to the efficiency of street lighting, for instance, prescribing even more efficient lighting options than your national standards. On the side of climate change adaptation, you can regulate a higher minimal share of green infrastructure. You can also use this, if you have, of course, the information on how to properly set this up. You can also regulate biodiversity standards by calling upon regulations on which green infrastructure elements you can actually implement. There's a lot of options that you can use for flood preventions, for instance, including water retention zone and so on. Mobility and waste are a bit more problematic. Mobility primarily because it's a very dynamic category, so you will mostly be influencing mobility at rest, meaning parking, infrastructure, and so on. And waste is something that we have avoided because it is a very delicate political issue, but also some elements regarding waste management can also be integrated. I just have two final slides. One is on the barriers. So there are some challenges to integrating this process. They're mostly administrative and political. One of the biggest issues is that the responsibilities and budgets are very often split across departments and levels of governance. Different levels of governments have different priorities, especially if they are from different parties, for instance, and it can be quite a challenge to coordinate all of the communications between all of them. There is also a lack of understanding between the cause and effect with regards to a lot of what I'm saying. So not many people will completely understand how green infrastructure actually positively impacts an area, and that can cause problems. Some of the policy and planning instruments can be vaguely defined, depending, of course, on your cultural connotations and the legal framework within which you are working with. You might require explicit allowances to do something within your laws, whereas in some cases you're just looking for you're just wary if a law explicitly bans what you're trying to do, and so on and so forth. And just briefly, we have successfully implemented this methodology in several cases. Vienna is something that happened before the project started, and it was one of our key inspirations. So in Vienna, they have this integrated spatial and energy planning approach, where they basically have an additional layer to their spatial plans, specifically addressing energy. And through this process, they have managed to basically decarbonize vast stretches of their city. And we have managed to implement this methodology in 3 cities successfully, in a sub-urban spatial plan and the general urbanistic plan of the cities of Karlovac and the city of Zagreb, our capital, and also a sub-urban spatial plan within the city of Križevci. In all of these cases, there are strong indications for a ban on the use of fossil fuels for space heating. There are higher standards for energy efficiency and higher standards for the use of green infrastructure in all of these cases. And the last thing that I would like to point out, this is a great solution for all new developments and for reconstructions, but unfortunately doesn't really help much with the existing infrastructure that you have. If it is not being addressed and it doesn't require any permits, then the spatial plans cannot help you. But for anything that's being newly constructed or rebuilt, spatial plans are an excellent way to try and drive the transition that you need in your cities and regions. And that's it for me. I'm sorry if I extended my time.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Tomislav, and thank you very much, Ine, for both of your presentations. Now we will have a Q&A session for our 2 first speakers. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat, or we still have the option, if you want to ask directly your question to the speakers, you can raise your hands, and then we will allow you to unmute and to directly ask your question. First of all, I would just comment on the 2 presentations. I think it was a good way to see first the different risks and how it's linked to the energy sector. And then we had the presentation of Tomislav, who showcased the manner in which it can be combined into planning. So I think it was very complementing the first presentation of Ine. And maybe I can start with one question I would have for Ine on the participation aspect of citizens that you mentioned, that is really essential to allow for success in the implementation of the measures. Do you have any best practices or recommendations around this available for all the participants, maybe material or tools?
Thanks. Yes, since it was the -- reported enabling factor, we actually wrote a whole chapter on citizen engagement and awareness raising and all the different measures adaptation measures that you can have. I can share also the link. It's already in the presentation, but I can share again the link to the Urban Adaptation Report, which was really meant to look at what are cities already doing and have an indication of what is actually working, what may not be working. And in particular there, we really saw that the projects that involved really from the beginning, even before kickoff of the project and the planning phase, if that involved people in the neighborhood, it tended to be a lot easier to implement the project and also have it accepted and potentially even maintained to a certain extent afterwards.
Thank you. In particular, also, if you already know, but maybe I know there's the database of best practices, but I'm also working on cooling aspects for the southern countries. I don't know if you have same question, specific guidances or tools dedicated to that aspect, because it's sometimes complicated to find some tools and inspirations.
So I think for that, probably the best resource is the Climate Adapt website. Has a huge variety of case studies, a lot of which also look at heat waves and at cooling measures for the southern countries. So also that is already in the presentation, but I can share again as well.
Thank you very much. I see that here also other participants are interested in those links. So if you can put them in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you. And maybe, yes, for Tomislav, same questions. If you have some resources, tools or guidances, especially or best practices, especially in relation to the barriers that you mentioned. And second question also on this coordination between the different departments and levels, especially if you have here best practices. I think those would be very interesting for participants.
Absolutely. So we have created the in-plan practice, which is a guidance document. It's not really a full-on methodology on how to implement or how to integrate energy and climate elements into spatial plans. I'm saying it's not a full methodology because spatial planning practices can vary somewhat across Europe. Thank you, Irena, for posting the link to the chat. So it's not really a full methodology that you can follow one-on-one, but it does provide examples on which steps you would need to take. There are good examples for all of these steps with some stories which you can find inspiration in, and you can also find some best cases of integrated plans within this in-plan practice. So I would suggest having a look if you think that this is a methodology that can help you. And we're also running regular capacity building exercises where we are trying to train primarily agencies on how to implement this methodology within their sphere. So basically within the cities and regions that they're supporting.
Thank you. I see that on the chat we have one question on good practices in terms of CCAPs that integrate spatial-based analysis, spatially explicit considerations. I don't know if you want to add.
Sure. Unfortunately, no. We haven't seen SecOps that actually use a detailed spatial resolution for their assessments. I do have to admit that I haven't really been looking into many SecOps across Europe, primarily because of the language barrier. But the ones that I have seen, they do not do spatial assessments such as this. However, a lot of the elements, a lot of the measures presented in many SecOps can easily be translated into a spatial component, or sorry, a spatial component can easily be added to them. For instance, anything that's related to energy efficiency of buildings can very easily be linked to certain neighborhoods, certain building types, and so on. And anything that has any connections with, for instance, district heating is very, very easy to connect spatially. So a lot of these measures can easily be translated, can easily be transferred, and also a SecOp could easily adopt a spatial component within its assessment as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Tomislav. We have another question that came in the chat, maybe for both speakers. Do you have specific best practices to approach policy stakeholders, so policy people, for awareness raising actions? That's pretty interesting also to convince policy people to tackle the topic and maybe to merge the two actions. Because usually they're quite busy and it can be tricky to come as trainer on such topics. So do you usually base on existing events or dedicate a specific moment for this? Yes, Tomislav?
Yeah, so I can actually give you a nice example of what we did in Croatia. So as you're probably aware, the last round of the NECP development, so the National Energy and Climate Action Plans, also required the implementation of multi-level governance climate and energy dialogues. Basically a place where local and national and regional level are supposed to exchange ideas and inputs into the NECP. We have managed to do this quite successfully in Croatia with the support of another life-funded project called NEC Platform, where we basically managed to bring together 9 national ministries and representatives of several local and regional governments, NGOs, and so on and so forth. And within this platform, we've created a space where all of the stakeholders can discuss matters related to energy and climate, and also finance related to energy and climate. One of the key enablers in this process was our Ministry of Finance, together with our Ministry of Sustainable Development, which is responsible for energy side. Anyway, by creating something along these lines, so basically a physical and virtual space in which such dialogues can happen, this is something that can greatly enhance the capacity at all levels to better understand, but also plan and implement climate and energy actions. Everybody within this process was very keen to participate. The national level clearly understood that there is that they have issues with reaching the local and regional level, that they do lack capacity, space, and opportunities to discuss with cities and regions, and they were very eager to jump on this opportunity and use this. And the same goes for cities. Now, breaking barriers within a, let's say, local or national or regional government, so breaking the silos, can be a bit more challenging, especially the bigger the city, the more administration, the more barriers and the more silos you have. This is something that we have been working with, I think, since the inception of the agency some 15 years ago, me personally 6 when I started. And this is a very difficult process. In some cases, especially in smaller, more agile regional governments, this works. In some cases, you can even establish horizontal offices specifically focused on resilience or climate actions that can then work across departments and basically infiltrate every aspect of a city's development. But in big, established, very bureaucratic institutions, this can be a huge challenge, and this is something that we haven't been very successful in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tomislav, for your very comprehensive answer. I don't know if Ine, you want to add something?
I mean, it was nice to hear a concrete example.
Yeah.
I can add very briefly that the European Environment Agency obviously works a lot more with the national level. So our role is mostly to inform then the national level and also the Commission and the European bodies. So we do actually bring out a lot of publications, materials, short briefings, which are aimed at policymakers, general public to some extent, and also media. So that is a way to sort of push the message across. And we do increasingly have a focus also on the subnational and local level, because we want to have that recognized, obviously, as the place where the implementation is taking place.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Without further ado, I think we can go ahead with our agenda. And now we'll have the presentation by Milenko Sedlar.
So, well, thank you, Tomislav and Ine, first of all, from my side too. Now I'll give the floor to Milenko Sedlar. Milenko is the head of the climate department at REGEA and a valued expert in the field of climate change adaptation. He has led, among others, dozens of climate proofing assessments in Croatia. So, Milenko, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So, as mentioned, I'll be speaking about the climate proofing, which was kind of I would say lately in Croatia, it made a lot of disturbance, actually, to be quite honest, in the I would say, first of all, the process of technical preparation of the project, and I think that throughout my presentation you will see also why. So, Nadej, if you can please, next slide. So basically, in a nutshell, for those who do not know, the climate proofing is basically a process that should contribute to the resilience of the infrastructure on climate change effects. In the future, especially, it's basically applied to the infrastructure that has a lifespan of more than 5 years. So it is a process that addresses both mitigation and adaptation activities, and it's connected really directly to the infrastructure projects. it should help basically to the decision makers and the entire decision making process to align their projects with the overwhelming goals of Paris Agreement and the all other legislation that is in the area of energy efficiency, but even more so in the domain of the climate change adaptation. Next slide, please. So why do we do basically climate proofing? It's been said a couple of times today already, and you probably all of you know that we're living in different times now when it comes to climate extremes, or I would say even new normal things that we are facing on daily basis. On this slide, you can basically see that I'll be saying a couple of examples of Croatia. So on the left side, you can see a typical map of Croatia in the summertime. That is mostly in the red zone, which means that the temperatures are above average for the entire Croatia, and we are facing a lot of heat waves. For example, last year we had 46 hot nights in the city of Zagreb, which is a record for the city of Zagreb for, and it did amplify very much in lately. That's one extreme, and on the other side, you can see basically one street in the city of Rijeka. This is not a river. This is a street that turned out into a river. It was in September in 2022. We have more example on that, but on that particular day, we had almost 300 liters of rain in a single day. You can all remember a couple of weeks ago what happened in Valencia, and this is also something that we are facing on daily basis. And the one thing that we know that our infrastructure is not prepared to basically withstand these things that are happening. So what we have to do with the existing infrastructure, we have to kind of adapt it. And when we build new infrastructure, what we have to do is make sure that it will be resilient to the effects of this kind. So next slide, please, Natasha. This is the map of the city of Zagreb. You can see here. You can see this red part of the city. It's been already mentioned today by Ina that heat stress is among the top challenges and top risks that cities of Europe, not only Europe, are facing with. And this red part is the center of the city of Zagreb mainly. So this is the highly urban area, very densely populated. And the blue color on the north and blue/green on the south are basically the parts of the city where we have more green infrastructure. So what happened actually in the city of Zagreb in a last climate period, as we call it, what we had is the official reclassification of the climate class for the city of Zagreb. Not to go into many details, what happened is that Zagreb now has a climate class that is more close to the one of the Mediterranean cities. And I don't know how much you know, but I'll remind you anyway that Zagreb is not at the coast. So Zagreb is inland, and it's the capital, which is on the inland part of Croatia. So this is how we see that the extremes, and I would say the very much of vulnerabilities are happening here as well. Next slide, please. Next slide, Nadesh. I'm sorry about this. I have some technical issues with my. Just in a nutshell, why do we do climate roofing now? It basically is the fact that some of people are still perceiving climate proofing or an exercise of climate proofing as a cost. And we talk about with project developers and engineers, but honestly, what this slide is showing you that even though projects are a bit more expensive now when it comes to capital costs in the initial phase, what it does is basically in later stages of project phases. We are decreasing the damage that can happen, and it is by far. So you can see this is on global average that that if we do apply the climate proofing exercise and we do apply measures for infrastructure projects, we'll have much less damage when it comes to money, but also when it comes to resilience of our infrastructure as well. Next slide, Nadesh. So next slide, please.
It's the next slide on my computer. I hope it will.
It's the background slide. I don't know if it's the
Yeah.
background slide, which is fine. Yeah. Okay. So why do we do that? You know, when we build infrastructure, we don't build it for a couple of years. So the lifespan of infrastructure is usually quite longer, 30 to 50 years. And if we don't do the climate proofing now, we are going to be ending up in locking up our infrastructure for many, many years, and we'll be building infrastructure that is not climate resilient and that is not in line with the Paris Agreement and EU climate regulations. This goes very well in hand with what was Tomislav speaking already earlier today, that, you know, how do we align also with spatial planning, for example, that with spatial planning as a tool, we are able to also impose some above national level standards and stuff like that, that are allowing actually the faster energy transition, but also the faster climate change adaptation as well. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is just about shortly about what is infrastructure. What are we talking when we're talking about infrastructure? So it really is a broad concept, which is, you know, deals with buildings, network infrastructure, a whole range of building systems and assets. So basically, whatever you think of when you think about infrastructure, you should be doing climate proofing for that. So next slide, Nadej. You know, we have been working already for climate proofing for 2 years now, maybe 1.5 years now, and we've been really doing different types of infrastructure for now. So that's why I said whatever you can think about infrastructure, that should be climate proof. So basically, just shortly what it consists of. Basically, it has two pillars. One is climate neutrality, the other is climate resilience. And the good thing about this climate proofing exercise is that it actually merges the climate neutrality and climate resilience part. So, and besides these two pillars, we have two stages. One's first stage is stage of screening. When we talk about climate neutrality, we are screening whether the emissions from the infrastructure are higher than 20,000 tons. If yes, then it goes to the detailed analysis according to the EIB regulations on climate or greenhouse gas monetization. And if we talk about the climate resilience in the first one, in the phase one, we're talking about climate risk assessment. So what we do is basically are analyzing the risks of climate change to the infrastructure on a specific location. And if we find that we have significant risks, we go to the next phase. Here, I have to say that in all the climate proofing exercises that we did as an agency, we always went to the second phase with the climate resilience part because of the risks that are actually being, you know, posed to the infrastructure. Next slide, please. So this is basically when it comes to climate neutrality. I've told what I had to say about this, but you know, if we are above this 20,000 tons, then we are going into the second phase, and this is when we do the detailed climate gases. So GHG monetization. We haven't been doing this because we haven't been working on bigger infrastructure projects. So basically, this is connected to bigger projects like aviation and industry. Next slide, please. But when it comes to the resilience part, this is where we had a lot of, not a lot, all of our projects went to second phase. After we did initial screening phase, we have identified that we have severe risks that are, posing threats to the infrastructure that was in the scope of our work. And we were doing this for all of our projects. So when it comes to positioning of our climate proofing, it was, I would say, quite tricky that people often start to think about climate proofing in the later stages. For example, already in the stages of the design, main design, or even later when the main design is finished, which is wrong. And we are trying to kind of reiterate that to when we talk about it with cities and regions and with policymakers, that basically climate change adaptation and climate proofing should be already addressed when you're talking about when you are in the phases of strategy development and plans, because this is something that your later infrastructure projects being basically based upon. And Tom was talking also, it needs to be addressed in the spatial plans, but also in the budget plans. As soon as you start thinking about it, being that adaptation plans or independent climate risk assessments or assessment of risks, which is directly connected to the development strategies, the better, because it often happened to us that people were coming to us to climate proof their project when they already had the main design, which is really wrong, because then you're basically done. And you'll see later on, I'll show our methodology of how do we do climate proofing, and it will be more clear to you why it has to be done and addressed earlier. Next slide, Andrzej. This is basically part that shows the documentation and verification that is needed when it comes to the climate proofing part. So all of these things I was saying to you have here on one slide, because it'll be available for this presentation. And we have, I would say, a good cooperation with our ministers, especially the Minister of Regional Development, who is in charge for cohesion policy in Croatia, who has kind of embraced this this procedure and this process, and also our methodology for climate proofing. And basically now all of the projects in Croatia that are being funded from the structural funds they have to go through the process of climate proofing. But for example, in the city of Zagreb, this is mandatory for all the projects now. We have come to agreement with the mayor that all the projects that are infrastructure type, regardless of where are they being financed from, are undergoing the procedure of climate proofing. And we have some talks with the ministry who's in charge for the climate law. So from the next year, probably all the projects in Croatia will have to be climate proofed in the next year. So next slide, please, Nadej. This is basically a part of our methodology as how we do it. Climate proofing is, I would say, much more comprehensive document than this one is. But what we try to do is we try to connect the process of main design development and basically development of technical documentation, also the feasibility study, with the climate proofing process. As in a certain point in time, there was a threat that basically this will become yet another obligation that will be just checked, like in the checklist, and there, we will not have a straight connection with the main design development. So what we basically have developed is the methodology that is connecting the development of main designs with the climate risk assessment, and then basically we work together with the developers, and so architects, designers, and everybody who is in charge of our infrastructure development at early stage. What we do is that we are developing this kind of matrix, which is presenting, the climate risks and all the things that are related to the climate risks, so the probabilities, impacts, and basically in general vulnerabilities. And what we do and what we ask the designers is to link that and address that in their main designs. And the end result is basically that all of the risks are assessed in the main designs and are basically taken care of. So this is something that has to be done, and it is submitted as an annex to a project development documentation. Next slide. It could. So what we've learned is, and I'm going to repeat it now. You should be thinking about climate proofing in relation to all of the processes in your cities and regions. So when it comes to strategic planning, spatial planning, budgetary planning, the earlier you think about it, the better. It is mostly related to the infrastructure projects, so the ones that I mentioned that have the lifespan above 5 years, but not only. So the timing of the process is quite crucial. The sooner the process is engaged, so experts are engaged in the process of developing infrastructure, it's better, because it's then easier to develop the project. And actually, the one thing that is the most important is the cooperation of experts for climate proofing with all the other experts. So civil engineers, architects, mechanical engineers, so everybody who is basically involved in the process of infrastructure development, so new developments or reconstructions, is crucial. And next slide, I think it should be my last one. is that I want to say now that we've been asked on a couple of occasions, for example, by the European Investment Bank to calculate within a EIB framework loan for some infrastructure in Zagreb to calculate how much of the entire capital spending for project is being basically spent for the adaptation efforts. This is a novelty to us, and we have managed to do it for one of the biggest projects. And but this is our future development, so we're going to be developing also methodology for how to be able to monetize these costs. We have, we've been able to calculate it now, but it is really a exhaustive exercise. And we have, just to give you an order of magnitude, we have calculated on a 66 million euro project, the overall adaptation costs on top of everything was 2.67%. It was basically a reconstruction of an old building to a new modern library. In our kind of a portfolio, there is a span from 2 to 5% so far on how much of the costs are basically directed into the climate change adaptation, so basically increasing the resilience of infrastructure. And that's it. If you have questions, feel free in the Q&A to ask, or also in the chat.
Thank you very much, Milenko. I think we will now go to our next speaker.
Yes. So now we have a presentation from Eleonora Leonardi from EURAC. So Eleonora is a civil engineer and researcher at the Institute for Renewable Energy in EURAC, and she is specialized in energy retrofit of historic buildings. So she combines hydrothermal and building energy simulations with interdisciplinary approaches to optimize heritage conservation and energy efficiency. Her work also explores innovative solutions for historic buildings. So Eleonora, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And yes, so I will present today a specific case study that was done within the project Impetus about adaptation of historic building to the future climate. Okay. So just to introduce the project, Impetus is an Horizon 2020 project with 9 European countries involved. And specifically, we concentrate on this pilot valley that is Valle dei Laghi, that is a mountain valley in the north of Italy. And what I present you today is a specific case study that we did in this valley. To the methodology, so firstly, we analyzed the climate of the valley, and then together with another partner of the project, we modeled the future climate. And in parallel, we did a building stock analysis of the valley in order to select some representative buildings of the valley. And after these two introduction part, we did some building simulation in present and future climates for the specific buildings that we selected. And then by means of this simulation, we outlined some adaptation strategies for the future climate. So firstly, for the climate change, we identify 2 main critical issues that are the rising temperatures and the extreme raining events. And we try to understand how these issues influence the buildings. And we came to 3 points. So once the summer overheating is getting more and more. Second, the building are deteriorating, and we could have potential problems in the wall stratigraphy, especially if we use internal insulation. And third, we wanted to understand if the temperature are rising so much that the energy intervention that we are doing now will not be more effective for the winter part. And the real problem is that when we plan an energy retrofit now, we take in consideration only current and past climate. That means it can be that in some years the energy retrofit that we did now it's not anymore up to date. Firstly, I will explain you really fast what is a dynamic building simulation in order that you can understand what we are simulating. So we have some input and we give them to a software, and the software simulate and give us some output. And as inputs, we give the geometry of the building, the external climate, the occupation of the building, the habits, and the heating system. And as output, we get the internal climate, the energy consumption, and also, in our case, the wall behavior. And so we have many results from this simulation, but what we analyze and what I will show you today are comfort results and energy results. For the comfort, we analyze winter and summer discomfort. As winter discomfort, we mean the percentage of hours with temperature below 18 degrees, and as summer discomfort, we mean the percentage of hours with temperature above 25 degrees. And for the energy, we analyze the heating demand. And this is the building that I show you today, so that we simulated. It is a residential building. It is representative of the valley, so it has some characteristics that are representative of the valley. And you see, we simulated it in 3 variants. So we simulated the original building with the original material and with the attic not lived. So the attic was open with this opening that you see, ventilated and not lived. Then we simulate a second variant, that is the current building. So the building underwent an energy renovation in 1996, where the building envelope was minimally insulated, and also the attic was converted into flats. So the opening were closed by windows, and the attic was lived. And then we simulated a future building that is the sum of all adaptation strategy that we outlined. And we simulated these 3 buildings for 7 climates. Once the 10 years of the past present climate, so from 2014 to 2023. Then the near future, 2050, for 3 carbon pathway scenario: optimistic, pessimistic, and intermediate. And the far future climate, 2090, also for these 3 scenarios. And what I show you now is the discomfort in the future climate. On the left, the winter discomfort, on the right, the summer discomfort. And you see in blue tonality, there is the original building for all 3 scenarios: intermediate, pessimistic, and optimistic. And in red, there is the current building. And what we see that even in the far future, even in the worst scenario, if we don't renovate the building, we will still have a lot of winter discomfort in the houses, in the not renovated houses. That means we have more or less 40% of hours where the temperature is below 18 degrees. And what we see on the right for the summer discomfort is the same. So if we don't renovate the building, also for the most positive scenario, we will still have 50% of the hour of summer discomfort, so where the temperature is above 25 degrees. This means winter will be crucial also in future climate for the buildings, and additionally, we have to implement strategies to reduce summer discomfort, also in this building that is located in a mountain valley. So firstly, we try some strategies to the building and we simulated them. First strategy that we try is the ventilation and shading strategy. That means a window opening during the night to let the fresh air come inside, and shading during the day. And we see on the right that from the red column we go to the green column. So just using ventilation and shading strategies, we can reduce the overheating hours from 100% to 30%. So probably maybe yes, we will still need a cooling system, but we can reduce the cooling demand through these strategies. So we have to plan now shading devices when we plan an energy retrofit, and we have to raise awareness about the importance of this strategy, and we have to begin now. Then what we tried is the building envelope insulation. So we have to bring the building to the current standard, and also it is an historic building. This is possible. And yes, we see that we really doing like this, we really reduce the heating demand, as you see on the right. And after it, we wanted to understand how the building works and how the attic works in the building. So it is better to have an habited attic or an uninhabited attic but ventilated. Well, on the left, you see the heating consumption, and the yellow column is for the inhabited attic, and the violet column is for the not lived attic but ventilated. And for the heating consumption, actually is a lot better, much better to leave the attic. And because the ratio between the volume and the thermal envelope is bigger, and so that is that really helps. But what happens for the summer discomfort? Actually, for the summer discomfort is the same. So because the ceiling between the flats and the attic is really good insulated, and we have to do it this for the winter. Because of this, we don't have extents between the attic and the flats, and that's why for the summer it's more or less the same. So actually, the message here is that leaving so much volume of the building as possible really helps to reduce energy consumption. Then actually we wanted to reduce more the heating consumption that we see on the right. And to do this, we try to implement in the simulation a ventilation with heat recovery. And we see that with the ventilation with heat recovery, we don't have winter discomfort, and also the heat consumption is really going down. That's because if we don't have a ventilation with heat recovery, we still have to open the windows in winter to maintain a good air quality, and this is also a loss for the heating consumption. And then because this is an historic building, we asked us what's the difference in doing internal or external insulation. So firstly, we verified that internal insulation is working in this case. So we did all simulation. You see some of them on the left part, and we check that internal insulation works for its future. And then because the common sense is that internal insulation worsen the summer discomfort. We also did some simulation to understand if it is true, and the answer is actually not. It's not true. So it really depends on many things. If internal or external insulation is better for the summer discomfort, but we saw by the simulation that the internal partitions really play a great role, and that's why we have more or less the same result in summer discomfort for all type of insulations. And the last graph that I show you is the yearly heating demand for all three buildings that we simulate: the original building, the current building, and the future building. The future building has the sum of all of these adaptation strategies that I mentioned. And you see these three buildings for all the 7 climates. What we can see is that if we don't renovate the building, so the blue column, also in the far future and also in the most pessimistic scenario, I will still have a really big heating demand. But it is really possible also to renovate an historic building and to adapt it to the future climate. And you see the bar in yellow is the heating demand for the future building. So to conclude, renovating historic building and adapting them to the future climate is possible. And just two main conclusion is that winter will stay crucial also in future climate, and shading and ventilation strategy really help for the summer discomfort. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. It's very interesting also to have concrete on-the-ground experiences with retrofitting of buildings. So thank you very much. Now I will open the floor for some questions and answers. So please do not hesitate to type your questions in the chat or to raise your hands so we can give you the floor to directly ask your questions to the speakers. I will start with my questions. That's a privilege I have as moderator. I wanted to ask you, Milenko, if you have some examples of climate proofing of energy infrastructures in particular, or any other kind of infrastructure, but that could be interesting to know.
Well, yeah, I mean, for example, not lately, we are also working on photovoltaic plants. So whatever, most of our buildings are, when being reconstructed here now, are being accompanied by the photovoltaic power plants anyway. So we also are working on the climate proofing of those facilities. And there are certain risks that are associated with the power plants as well. For example, the heat stress, which is quite challenging for the equipment. So there are measures to be taken, like storing the regulatory equipment into cooling types of facilities and stuff like that. So as well as the potential of obviously the high winds, which is driving the project development into the sphere of additional mechanical elements that are putting the power plant into place harder to the main building. So and basically all the others, as I was mentioning in my presentation, is very much connected to the place where the infrastructure is being built. So there are different risks also that are connected to the spatial positioning of the project as well. So probably the hardest projects are the ones that are huge lines like railways, like bike lines, like new roads, bridges, and stuff like that, because they are on a bigger space anyway. They're taking much more of efforts to be also assessed when it comes to risks as well. So yes, on all energy infrastructure as well. And I think that the most challenging ones will be the electrical grids anyway, in certain parts of Croatia.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Milenko. I also have a question for Eleonora, which is if you have some recommendation or advice to better integrate future climate expectations into simulations for retrofitting of buildings. I think it also goes with a bit with the question that we have on the chat, which is what assumptions in your modeling for climate adaptation are most important or significant for the results?
Yes, so actually, first, the real problem is that you have to model the future climate, and this maybe, as many of you know, is can take some issues. Also because our simulation are work hourly with hourly value. That means we have to simulate. We have to simulate with a climate that is hourly based, and this is the first issue. But anyway, the thing is that we then post-process the results of the whole year. So actually we kind of mean also the climate, and also the important thing is that we can we have then in 10 years simulation, we have some we also include some extreme events and not extreme events. So it's, yeah, but the assumption then so this is the most different assumption that we had to deal about comparing to other simulation, because for other simulation we just have the present climate or climates from the norm that all includes already these assumptions. So yeah, but maybe yeah, so the advice is really that when we plan a building renovation, we really have to take in consideration future climate. For example, because of the shading system, because if we plan a building renovation now, for a building that is in a mountain valley, for example, we would say for the present climate it is not necessary to plan a shading system. But yes, if we simulate a future climate, then there are some other assumptions that bring to other results, let's say. I don't know if I answer.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I was wondering, you worked mostly on public buildings or private buildings?
Yeah, so generally we work for both the buildings, and the building that I present was actually a residential building, but belonging to the social housing company. Because they are because they share the information, and they are really interested in the study, and we are actually in contact. So we did some presentation of our works also to local authorities, to measures, and we will do a presentation to the technician of the municipalities, because they are really interested actually in this issue of the future climate. So yeah, so we work on both, and we hope that our results will be helpful for both, so for all buildings. Thank you.
We received a more technical question that I will ask, but if you want to give more details afterwards by writing, do not hesitate. The question is, did you calculate the hydrogeothermal characteristics with the simulation programs, or did you take measurements in situ? Could you tell us more about the methodology in terms of humidity?
Yes, so actually we we use this. So we used Wi-Fi Plus that also can do hydrothermal simulation, and we tried to understand which stone. So maybe this is a specific question, so I think it needs a specific answer.
Yeah.
But we used the Mansory that we have is the stone Mansory. So we spoke with the major and with the people, just really to understand which stone it was used. And then for the stone that we used, we found some literature with the properties that were describing the properties, and then we took we took a stone from the library of the software that was more near to these properties that we had. Actually, yes, because sometimes we, in other projects and so on, we also do some measurements in situ, but they are really expensive and time expensive. And we saw actually that if we find a stone that is really near where some properties are really near to the properties of the library, it's accurate enough for the simulation. And the second one, could you tell us about methodology in terms of humidity? I don't know if you mean the how we post-process the results, but yes, we post-process the results in terms of, for example, the relative humidity between the insulation and the stone, to understand that this is not too high, and also in terms of moisture content for the stone and also for the insulation. I don't know if I answered, otherwise I think you can unmute and we can speak about it.
Thank you, Eleonora. Do not hesitate also to reach out after the webinar in case you have technical questions or want more details. I will close the Q&A session with just one cross-cutting question on funding, because you also mentioned it, Milenko. How do you know which kind of funding tackle both or integrate both adaptation and mitigation of retrofitting of buildings or climate proofing? Is there one specific funding that is more fit to those aspects, or you can choose from the already existing and traditional fundings?
Well, I can tell you from the perspective in Croatia is that we have specific calls when it comes to basically mitigation. So energy refurbishment of buildings and other types of infrastructure. But when it comes to adaptation or the climate proofing part, it is now a mandatory thing and it's an eligible cost. So whenever you do your reconstruction or new build, this is an eligible cost. And for example, all this already from the design phase to the implementation phase, it is an eligible thing. So that's one thing. And all the major funders when it comes to development banks, I mentioned the EIB, but also other banks in Croatia are now basically, when it comes to if you're building a new building that is to be, in accordance to the new climate challenges, you will be getting better terms for your loans. And all of them are now asking to, for climate proofing to be performed in your projects. For example, I was talking about this building in Zagreb. So it is partially co-financed from the structural funding, and the other part of the money is coming from the EIB framework loan. And the EIB would not let the transfer of money to the city prior that we made calculations when it comes to mitigation and adaptation. So stuff like that are, I would say, now normal. So it's nothing on top of anything. It's I would say business as usual when it comes to funding. So, and the other things are obviously different in other countries, but I would say it became a new normal now, which is good.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Milenko. Also looking at the time, I think we will go to our last presentation of today, Christian Kainz.
Yes, I will introduce Christian. First of all, thank you, Milenko, Eleonora, to present your valuable best practices. So Christian, he's our last, but of course not least speakers of today. He is the head of program at Adelphi. He is leading the team that focuses on adaptation to climate change. He is primarily concerned with analyzing the consequences of climate change for different groups and developing strategies for dealing with climate risks. So, Christian, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thanks, Irene. I think initially I had 15 minutes, but to allow for some questions and really allow us to close on time, I'll try to be a bit quicker. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Irene, for the introduction. Happy to have the opportunity to talk a bit about how to avoid maladaptation, how to monitor adaptation actions. And I think it ties in well with what we've heard before, especially the insightful comments on climate proofing. I'll be talking about these two topics against the background of what the team at Regilience, the project that was introduced at the beginning, did. Mostly colleagues from Fresh Thoughts, namely Teresa Geidel, who worked on maladaptation, and myself and the team from Adelphi. As I said, we'll have a brief look at what is maladaptation, how to avoid it, and then segue into a short overview on the relevance of monitoring evaluation of adaptation actions. So what is maladaptation and why does it matter? Maladaptation are adaptation actions that are meant to help deal with physical impacts of climate change, increase of heavy rain events, increase of heat, but are actions that have the risk to lead to adverse outcomes. For example, actions that try to address climatic changes, but that increase greenhouse gas emissions, for example, thereby running contrary to our intention to do climate mitigation, or they shift vulnerability to other areas or to other actors, to other groups, or they lead to more inequitable outcomes. Think about what Ine from EEA said about just resilience, or that reduce the overall welfare now or maybe in the future. So good intentions, but potentially running the risk of having adverse outcomes. And that is often, of course, that should be mentioned, an unintended consequence. Nobody wants to engage in maladaptation, but it is something that we believe really should be taken into account, because adaptation, given slow progress in climate change mitigation, will become more and more important. And as we have seen from the colleagues, we are working on changing development plans, switching development pathways slowly but steadily. So what we're doing now will determine how infrastructure will look in 20, 30, 50 years. And it's not so easy. Climate change is about many different changes in a very complex system. There's some uncertainty. We don't know. There's different scenarios. As Eleonora showed us, we don't know where we'll stand. So it's important that we think about what to do, and of course, best to get it right from the start. To make it a bit more tangible, what are some examples of maladaptation? We heard again from Eleonora about insulation of buildings. That's a important measure when it comes to energy efficiency, but also for protection against heat in the summer. And if the wrong types of materials are chosen or not applied in a proper way, in case of floods, in flood-prone areas, insulation can be severely damaged, and in the worst case can also be dissolved and lead to pollution in case of flooding, which is something which is an additional environmental burden that we, of course, want to avoid. One example, again, looking at energy issues, looking at more frequent and heavier storms, especially in autumn in Europe. Some energy companies are advocating for relocating overground power lines underground. But of course, that also needs to take some things into account. Again, if flood issues are on the rise in some areas, that might affect underground power lines, or that's something that is happening in Berlin, where I'm based, in times of long dry spells. So with years, 3 or 4 years of too little rain, the earth becomes more compact and moves in ways that is not easy to foresee, and that can damage underground power lines and the connection between them, which can also lead to increased maintenance cost in the best case, and to additional outages in the worst case. In the interest of time, I'll skip the last example. But I do want to mention maladaptation, as with many things in adaptation, is a very context-specific issue. So one action can have a negative effect in one location, but a positive effect in another location. So here, really, it is important to think about the location and the context in which it is implemented, and to minimize risk of maladaptation. As Miljenko stressed many times, good planning and good climate proofing is important. The examples show it's not a theoretical issue, it's also a regulatory issue. Just 2 examples of where the EU Commission anchors the topic of maladaptation in their financing and regulation activities. If finance is requested under the Recovery and Resilience Facility, the member states who want to receive that finance need to provide an assessment, so-called do no significant harm assessment, where they show that if adaptation activities are implemented, that they do not run a high risk of maladaptation. So that is something where this topic is really covered in a fairly solid way, mostly looking at the public sector. More relevant for private sector actors is the topic of the EU taxonomy. And there again, if you want to show that certain economic activities contribute to the environmental goal of adaptation, then you also need to run a number of do no significant harm checks regarding climate change mitigation, biodiversity, where you show that the adaptation actions that are being implemented do not have any negative effects on the other 5 environmental goals under the EU taxonomy. How can you do such checks? One thing we suggested at Regilience, mostly developed by our dear colleague Teresa Geidel from Fresh Thoughts, is to have a number of checklist questions that help you to check whether certain dimensions of potential maladaptation have been checked. And we have the link here. I'll post it later in the chat as well. It's a short PDF document, 1 page that shows you how to fill in the checklist, then just really 3 pages, 16 questions that are fairly easy to answer. And then you get a bit of an assessment of the extent that a certain activity or strategy runs a risk of maladaptation. The checklist looks into risks and vulnerabilities, looks more at the specific measures, looks at the impacts that one wants to achieve, and looks at the topic of monitoring and evaluation. And you see a screenshot here on the right side where some of the questions are listed. And as you can see here, it's really the checklist asks you whether certain things have been considered. Here, for example, has the full range of current and future climate risks of a region, is that known? Has that been assessed? And if you say yes, we've looked at the full, what we believe is the full range, you can mark that here. And of course, the more no's or partially answers you get here, the higher, so that's the logic of the checklist, the higher the potential risk of maladaptation is. That's just a first starting point to get a first assessment. Monitoring and evaluation is a part of the checklist, and is also something we briefly wanted to cover here, because we believe it is very important, especially in the medium term. Just briefly, monitoring, that's about continuously checking the progress on certain activities. Evaluation is looking backwards and really diving deeper into whether success has been achieved in implementing a certain activity. And we believe it's important to talk about this topic because many times in climate change adaptation, it's about public funds that are being spent, and we believe it's important to be transparent how that money is used, to be accountable, and to show we are investing into certain adaptation activities and we have clear goals and we're working towards the goals. We can show progress, and we believe that builds trust among stakeholders, among citizens, and enables a good dialogue on what actions still need to be taken. And most importantly, I believe monitoring evaluation helps us to find out what helps in dealing with climate change and what maybe doesn't help. And Eleonora presented some modeling exercises that look into the future, and that's what that helps us to learn based on the dynamics of the model, and that's one part of learning. But then looking back and actually seeing what have we achieved, what did we not achieve, is another important part of learning. And then, of course, adjusting approaches subsequently. How to do it? Again, just very small, simple first steps. I think it's very important to, and that's very simple, but often overlooked, really have a clear goal or several goals for an adaptation activity, and have a clear goal and think about that this goal really is something that is measurable, so that when you look back, you can actually say we have achieved this goal or we have not achieved this goal. That's very important. And if you have a goal that is measurable, then ideally it's differentiated over time a bit, so that you don't have a goal that's okay, so in 15 years we'll be there, but something more that really helps you assess progress over time. And here you can look at aspects of theory of change or logical framework, where you say, okay, we have an immediate output of the activity, and then we have a medium-term outcome, for example, 2 or 3 years later, and then we have long-term impacts that go beyond the project, maybe 5 to 10 years. So a goal differentiated over time, and then a very simple monitoring plan that doesn't have to be a 10-page document, that can be a one-pager where you say, okay, when and how and who will check if progress is being made towards the goals that we have agreed on, and then implement the monitoring plan. And if progress isn't as foreseen, check why and adjust the approach. Now, often that sounds simple, but there, of course, are some challenges, as always. Looking at impact later on, it's often very difficult to really, you see the impact, but to find a causal chain and attribution towards the measure that you implemented, that comes with some challenges. Some terms in adaptation are very difficult to quantify. Resilience, increasing resilience, reducing vulnerability, very vague terms that are that I believe should be avoided when setting goals, because it's too challenging to measure. Then we have long time horizons. So some adaptation measures really we'll see their benefits in the medium future. Of course, we're dealing with uncertainty, limited data, and maybe last point here at the bottom, monitoring evaluation, of course, can show that things didn't work out and that maybe in hindsight we would have decided on something else, and that such insights might be politically risky for some, and that's why it can be inconvenient to engage in monitoring evaluation. Before we had questions about what tools, what resources do we have, and I think I'll conclude my presentation now and just briefly flip through these links, and you can click on them later on when the slides are shared. So there's some tools, some suggestions for indicators from the Impetus project as well, and some case studies that we have linked here in the slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christian, for the presentation. I apologize for the delay we had, so that you had to speed up a bit.
No problem.
I will now open the floor for questions. We have 3 minutes left. So if you have any question, please feel free to either type them on the chat. In the chat, or raise your hand so we can allow you to unmute yourselves if you want to directly ask your question to Christian. I will ask one question to start the Q&A session, and it would be about when it's also related with the work we're doing in resilience, because we never know when to address the monitoring and evaluation topic and aspect with regions or with authorities, if they don't know already the topic, or if they're not that advanced in the implementation or planning phase. So do you have some recommendation here on when within the policy cycle to address this monitoring and evaluation aspect?
Yeah, thanks, Nadej. So of course, in the policy cycle, one of the first steps is to look at risks and see what are important areas to work on in our regions. And the topic of monitoring is not yet relevant, but I think when it comes to formulating a strategy, then it becomes relevant, where you think about, okay, what's the goal of our strategy? Where do we want to go? And to make sure that you have a goal that you can, which achievement you can verify. So when it comes to strategy formulation, and when it comes to the design of concrete adaptation measures, when you really think about, okay, these are the measures we will implement or that we might want to implement, and then think about, okay, what do we want to achieve with each of these measures, and formulate something that's easy to monitor.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you very much. I don't see any question in the chat yet. So maybe if you want to give more details on one of the tool that you just listed, that would be a nice closing for the session.
Yeah, very happy to recommend the overview on resilience metrics that a sister project of Regilience developed, the Impetus project, where they outline different metrics, so indicators, also many on the regional level, that cover climate vulnerability and climate adaptation in different fields, and that can be a good starting point for thinking about what concrete goals certain adaptation actions might have.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much to all the speakers for the very interesting presentations. We learned a lot, I feel, during this session. Just a reminder for the participants that we will share the recording of the session, the slides, and the satisfaction survey in a follow-up email that you will receive later this week. And a big thank also to the participant for being here and staying until the end. I will share the satisfaction survey just now on the screen. It will be open, so you can reply. It's less than 2 minutes, and then slowly leave the meeting. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice rest of the day.
Thank you very much from my side too.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Nadesh, for
you.
organizing. Bye bye.